board games, not just for indoor recess anymore. This is my teaching and learning staff development presentation. And I don't know about you guys, but pretty much when I was a kid, that's kind of what board games were for. They weren't actual learning. They were just like, ooh, it was indoor recess time. It was raining. We got to play Guess Who or Connect Four or something like that. But let's see. I'd like to see, can board games be a vital part of mathematics education? And the reason I chose this topic is just from the last few chapters of Bowler. She made it clear that she thinks games and different open-ended tasks and even just little group projects that add little game elements are very important to math education and getting kids away from just thinking that, oh, I have to learn these memorized facts, to kind of flipping that script and saying, hey, I can learn why these things work the way they do and have fun at the same time and be more engaged with it. So I want to take us through 4 different ways that games can help kids with their math education. The first one is their motivation. And I love this quote by Rainer Knizia, who's a famous board game designer. And his quote in an interview was that if you can create a positive emotions in the learning process, you get by far the best results. And this is where games can help a lot. And that means so much coming from someone that, actually has firsthand experience designing games and designing them for kids and for adults alike. So one of the first ways is that playing a game is more attractive to kids than just doing work. They don't have to get a worksheet and think about doing something just sitting at their desk, but they get to play either in pairs or with small groups, and they get excited to, compete or work together depending on the game. Then being motivated to play gives the students a sense of independence, and they stay on task by themselves, like less classroom management issues for us as teachers as a result, and they are staying on task. And one thing I thought was just a great idea I got from this research from Huntley was that it's easier for students to cope with losing a game than failing a set of math problems or failing a test. Because, if it's a competitive game or a cooperative game where they're, kind of against the clock, that it's kind of one of 2 outcomes. You either win or you lose. There has to be a winner, there has to be a loser. And I think that's easier for students to cope with. And then another point under motivation is that, learning math can be very difficult. And it is. Some of these games are very difficult even. But learning through examples with board games can make it much more fun and engaging. The second thing that games bring to their math education is the interaction with each other. And this enhances their learning by allowing greater interaction between their peers. And I think that's just such a great thing that, public education gives, and that all the kids in the class are working together. They're not just sitting at their own little desk working on math facts. And another thing I found from an article is that the conversations they have with others are a means of like contemplation and reflection. So beyond just memorization, they're actually, talking out different solutions for games, or why they won or why they lost. And, this reflection, this practice that they're doing just kind of automatically is a way for them to more deeply learn mathematics. And I think that's just such a cool way that games can just, the kids kind of don't even realize they're doing it. But, one kid wins and they're like, well, why did he win or why did he lose? And having that reflection after they win or, after they complete a game, I think that's such an important aspect to bringing games into the classroom. Our third aspect of how games can help is the reasoning. And games just naturally develop problem-solving skills when they're playing games. And I like how this one researcher phrased it. It's like, even if the problem is just, how do I win this game? It's still, that's a simple question, but depending on the game, even pictured here, if you've ever played Go, it's a very simple game, but there's still so much complex reasoning and problem solving that goes on. You're trying to think ahead of your opponent and get to know the game and understand, your opponent too. It gets very complex very quick. And some other researchers found that reasoning doesn't develop instantly, but requires that students have many opportunities to develop their arguments in authentic context. And I like that word, authentic. And I think games are great for this because kids don't generally want to just play a game one time. They want to try it again and again, try to get better, try to win, try to figure out why they didn't win. It's just kind of natural for kids to be competitive that way. And these same researchers suggested that using strategy games is an authentic context for the development of these reasoning skills, problem-solving skills. So we're going to explore that a little bit later, the authenticity behind that games bring to the classroom. And the last thing I found was so interesting was these two researchers that saw how games bring the number sense and how children's number sense can be rapidly increased just from playing a game one time. So Robert Siegler and, I'm not sure how to say that, Geetha Ramani, in their 2008 research found that 4-year-olds from low-income backgrounds have lower number sense than their middle-class peers, which, we could have expected that. But results from their experiment indicated that providing these children with an hour experience of playing this board game that they devised that had consecutively numbered, linear arranged, and equal-sized squares improved their number sense to where it was indistinguishable from that of their middle-class peers who did not play the games. So, and then it also says playing, identical games that didn't have numerical elements to them did not have this effect. So that kind of made me think of like Candyland, where it's just colors, not like dice or numbers, are not as effective. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about games to have in your class. I think it's important to have games that do have numbers. Not that they all have to have that, but that have numbers and dice and shapes and things like that instead of just non-numerical games. And the other amazing thing that they found is that the gains in the children's number sense endured for at least 9 weeks. Like when they came back to test them 9 weeks later, they hadn't lost the skills that they had learned. So they inferred from their research that board games could easily be adapted and brought to different early learning settings and to close the gap for lower income students. And I just thought that research was so great. So now for the second part of my presentation, I kind of want to go over some authentic games. And the same researchers, McFeeters and Palfy, argue that the interactive nature of commercially produced board games promotes student activity. And they also suggest that since parents, teachers, and students can easily find them for purchase, they are perceived as authentic games. And I just think that's a great way to think about these things. It's like, when we make up these math games in class, it's kind of like kids know these are, these are kind of like educational games, maybe not super excited. But when they see something that they know that you can buy on Amazon or at Target, Target has so many of these games now, that those are authentic contexts for their learning, and their engagement is much higher. So I'm just going to take us through a few of my favorite board games that you can definitely find at Target. I've seen them, and that I think can promote their reasoning and their number sense and interaction and motivation. So the first one that I love is Carcassonne, and this is just one of the modern classics where you're drawing tiles and trying to connect cities. And I won't get into all the rules, but as you can see kind of from this picture, is each player is kind of marking their territory, and you get different points for scoring bigger cities and longer roads. And while this doesn't have any numerical elements, it does, when you're scoring your points, you do have to do a lot of math. So it doesn't have any like visual numbers right there, but as you're tallying up your score, you do have to keep a running tally of your score. And for each of these games, I linked to a great YouTube channel called Watch It Played. It's this guy, Randy Smith. He must have some kind of education background because he has some of the best board game tutorials. So any board game you're thinking of buying for your class or even for your family, definitely check out his channel, Watch It Played, because he just gives the best tutorials of the game, and without giving necessarily any reviews or judgment, just showing you how to play the game. And it really gives you a sense of if you think you're going to like the game or if it will be beneficial for your classroom. The next kind of modern classic is Settlers of Catan, and if you ever played this, it's a really cool game. It's kind of like similar to Carcassonne in that the board changes every game. The hexagons are random. You lay them out in a random pattern every time, and then you put the little chips on top that have different numbers. So every time you roll the dice, the land that you own that you have your settlements on, if you roll an 8, then that forest produces wood for you, and you're able to pick up cards. So it's a great way for the kids to see, that a 6 will come up more often than a 12. There's a lot of probability, so it's better to put your settlements on numbers that are going to come up, because when you have 2 dice, it's more common to get a 6 or an 8 rather than a 2, which you'd have to get double 1s to get a 2 or double 6s to get a 12. So you kind of want to stay away from the 12s and 6s. There's a little bit of strategy, but a lot of math going on behind the scenes of this game. Another great one that my family loves is Ticket to Ride, and this is great too because kids learn geography as well as keeping track of different routes, and you have to think about how many trains you're collecting, and it's all about connecting your routes and getting corresponding colors to be able to fulfill the different routes that are on your tickets. And there's a lot of math going on behind the scenes of this one as well. Like this track that you see going around with the numbers, you have to keep track of your score as the game goes, and if you don't keep accurate score, it can get pretty hairy in the end, and you have to recalculate. It's easier just to kind of keep a running tally as it goes. And I'm impressed. My daughter, who's going into 3rd grade, loves this game, and I thought it was going to be way too advanced, but I think even 2nd and 3rd graders can catch on to this one. And I know they've made a younger kids version as well. And another one that my family loves, and it's a little different because it's not a competitive game, is Pandemic. And it might be a little too close to home for right now, but because we're in an actual pandemic. But I think this is great because it's kind of like a team of students could play against the game. You're not playing against each other in a competition as much. You're playing against the puzzle of this game. So every round you're either a scientist, researcher, etc., and you have 4 actions that you can take to try to keep this disease from infecting. And then as you play, you flip different cards and different cities get infected. And if they get more than 3 cubes, an outbreak happens. So there's a lot of multiplication, and just like a disease spreads by multiplication, this game has lots of multiplication, and kids won't even realize how much math they're doing as they're playing the game and having fun. And it's a very difficult game. It can get very challenging to try to stop the disease, and things can get out of hand really quickly, but it can be a lot of fun. And then one last game that I've just recently got into, and it's a lot of fun. Another one that's a ton of math going on behind it is called Splendor. And this one you definitely will want to watch the YouTube video. It seems very complex at first, but the theme is pretty loose. It's real. I mean, this one really is a math game when you really break it down. Some loose theme about how you're a gem trader or something like that, but in the end, really, you're just trying to. They call these games like engine creation games. So you're really just trying to multiply what you have, and then what you have can buy better things. And in the end, the person who gets them, like I think it's the first person to 15 wins, is how you win. But the way you get there is kind of just by multiplying different cards. You have to get a certain set of cards to be able to get the next level of cards, and then the next level of cards gets you the victory points. So it's a lot of fun, and a lot of player interaction happens. But in the end, it's really just one big math problem. So I hope you enjoyed that and got some ideas for your classroom. There's just so many games out there now. I can't even count. There's new games coming out every week, and so many of them are really, if you break it down, they're just math problems, and they're very complex. So I hope that was helpful for you guys and gives you some ideas for things that you can bring into your classroom.